My name is Elsie, and at 57 years old, I thought I understood what it meant to be a mother. For 32 years, I had poured every ounce of love into raising my son Blake. But when I flew across the country for his wedding, carrying a piece of our family history in my suitcase and hope in my heart, I discovered that sometimes the people we love most can become strangers. I paid for my own ticket, brought the heirloom veil that had graced 4 generations of brides, wrapped the gifts with trembling hands. Everything I did with joy. But at the airport, when no one came to pick me up, I should have known. I should have seen what was coming. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should cherish you most, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe, because this story needs to be heard. Now let me start from the beginning and tell you how a mother's love was tested in ways I never imagined. I've been a widow for 5 years now. My husband Paul died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in March, and since then the house in Topeka, Kansas has felt too big and too quiet. But I managed. I kept myself busy with book clubs and gardening, with Sunday services at the church, where Paul and I got married 35 years ago. I had my routines, my small joys, and I had Blake. Blake is my only child. He was born when I was 25, a healthy baby boy with his father's blue eyes and my stubborn chin. Paul and I raised him in that same house in Topeka, watched him grow from a curious toddler into a kind, thoughtful young man. He played Little League baseball, graduated high school, with honors, went to college on a partial scholarship. We were so proud. 6 years ago, Blake got a job offer from a tech company in Boston. It was a dream opportunity, the kind of career Paul had always hoped Blake would have. Of course I told him to go. What kind of mother would hold her son back from his future? So Blake moved to Boston, and suddenly the distance between us wasn't just measured in miles. It was measured in phone calls that grew shorter, visits that grew rarer, a gulf I didn't quite know how to cross. 3 years ago, Blake met Courtney. He called me one Sunday evening, his voice bright with excitement. She works in marketing, Mum. She's smart, ambitious, beautiful. You'll love her. I smiled into the phone, happy that my son had found someone. But I didn't meet Courtney for months. The first time was over video call, her face pixelated on my laptop screen. She smiled politely, said nice to meet you, then made an excuse to leave. The second time was last year when Blake brought her home to Kansas for Thanksgiving. I cleaned the house for a week before they arrived. I cooked Paul's famous turkey recipe, made 3 kinds of pie, set the table with my mother's good china. When they walked through the door, I hugged Blake tight, then turned to Courtney with open arms. She accepted the hug stiffly, like embracing a stranger at a funeral. Over the next 3 days, I tried everything to connect with her. I asked about her work, her family, her interests. She answered in polite, clipped sentences, then turned back to her phone. When I showed her photo albums of Blake's childhood, she glanced at them with vague disinterest. When I suggested we bake cookies together, she said she didn't eat sugar. On their last morning, I found her in the kitchen, looking around with barely concealed disdain. "This house is very quaint," she said. I think she meant it as a compliment, but it felt like an insult. My home where I'd raised my son and buried my husband was quaint, small, insufficient. But Blake seemed happy, and that was what mattered. So when he called 2 months ago to tell me they were getting married, I cried tears of joy. "I'm so happy for you, sweetheart," I said. "When's the big day?" "June 22nd, he said. "In Boston. It's going to be at this beautiful resort on the coast." I waited for him to say more, to ask if I needed help with travel arrangements, to tell me he'd send me the flight information. Instead, he said, "I'll email you the details, Mum. We're keeping it pretty small, just close family and friends." Close family. The words should have comforted me, but they didn't. Something in his tone felt distant, perfunctory. Still, I pushed the worry aside. This was my son's wedding. Of course I'd be there. A week later, when I called to ask about my flight, Blake hesitated. "Oh, Mum, about that. Courtney and I are on a pretty tight budget with all the wedding expenses. Do you think you could book your own ticket?" I held the phone stunned. I knew the wedding was being held at an exclusive resort. I'd looked it up online, seen the pictures of manicured lawns and ocean views, the kind of place that charged thousands of dollars just for the venue. But Blake was saying they couldn't afford my plane ticket. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'll take care of it." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my laptop screen. A round-trip ticket from Topeka to Boston cost $498. That was nearly a quarter of my monthly retirement income. But this was my son's wedding. I clicked purchase. Over the next weeks, I prepared. I bought gifts, a set of fine china place settings that cost $200, an engraved silver picture frame for $80. I pulled out the most precious thing I owned, the item I'd been saving for this exact moment, the veil. It was wrapped in tissue paper stored in a white box in the top of my closet. I lifted it out carefully, my hands trembling. The lace was French delicate as spiderweb, the color of old ivory. It had been made in Paris in 1920, purchased by my great-grandmother for her wedding. She'd worn it walking down the aisle of a small church in Vermont. My grandmother had worn it in 1955, marrying my grandfather in a ceremony interrupted by summer rain. My mother had worn it in 1968, and I had worn it in 1988 when I married Paul. Each time the veil had been carefully preserved, passed down with stories and blessings. I'd always imagined giving it to my daughter, but I had no daughter. Only Blake. And now Blake was marrying Courtney. I folded the veil back into its box, imagining how beautiful she would look wearing it, how it would connect her to generations of strong, loving women. I pictured Blake's eyes filling with tears as his bride walked toward him, crowned in family history. The morning of my flight, I woke at 5. I showered, dressed in my nicest navy suit, applied makeup with a careful hand. I wanted to look good for my son, wanted him to be proud of his mother. I loaded my suitcase into my car, the veil box tucked safely in my carry-on bag, and drove to the Topeka airport. The flight left at 9 in the morning. I sat in my window seat watching Kansas disappear below me and texted Blake. "On my way, sweetheart. Can't wait to see you." 2 hours passed before he responded. "Great. See you soon." Just 2 words. No excitement, no warmth. I told myself he was busy with wedding preparations. Of course he was distracted. The plane landed in Boston at 3 in the afternoon, accounting for the time zone change. I collected my bag, checked my phone. No messages. I texted again. "Just landed. Where should I meet you?" I waited at baggage claim, watching families reunite around me. A young woman ran into her mother's arms, both of them crying happy tears. An elderly couple embraced their grandchildren. All around me, people were welcomed, celebrated, loved. 15 minutes passed. 20. I called Blake. The phone rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. My chest tightened with the first whisper of anxiety. I texted Courtney, fingers fumbling on the screen. "Hi, Courtney. I'm at the airport. Is Blake on his way?" She responded almost immediately. "Oh, hi, Elsie. Blake is tied up with wedding stuff. You can just take an Uber to our place." I stared at the message. An Uber. After flying 1,000 miles after not seeing my son for 8 months, I was supposed to take an Uber like any other stranger visiting the city. I typed back. I thought someone would pick me up. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "We're really busy. The address is in the group text. See you later." That was it. No apology, no warmth, nothing. I stood in the arrivals hall, clutching my suitcase and the box with the veil feeling invisible. Around me, life continued. Families laughed, lovers kissed, and I was alone. I'd never used Uber before. I downloaded the app with shaking hands, confused by the interface. A young woman noticed me struggling. "Do you need help?" she asked kindly. I nodded, too emotional to speak. She showed me how to request a ride, waited with me until the car arrived. "Thank you," I whispered. She squeezed my hand. "I hope things get better," she said. And I wondered what she'd seen in my face. The Uber driver was a friendly man in his 50s, Wedding, he asked, glancing at my garment bag. My son's, I said, trying to smile. He congratulated me, chatted about Boston traffic, pointed out landmarks. I barely heard him. I was looking out the window at this city that had taken my son from me, watching the buildings grow taller, the streets grow busier. The drive took 45 minutes. When we pulled up to Blake's building, I saw it was in an expensive neighborhood, all glass and steel and designer coffee shops. The driver helped me with my bags. "That'll be $62, he said. I tipped him $10 because he'd been kind and watched him drive away. $62, another chunk of my savings gone. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the building. Somewhere above me, Blake was living a life I knew nothing about. I pressed the buzzer. After a long moment, Courtney's voice came through the intercom. "Yeah, it's me, Elsie," I said. "Come up," she said. "5th floor." The door clicked open. I rode the elevator up my suitcase, heavy, my arms aching from carrying the veil box. When the elevator doors opened, Courtney was standing in the doorway of their apartment. She wore designer workout clothes, her hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, her skin glowing with expensive skincare. "You made it," she said. "Come in." She didn't hug me, didn't smile, just stepped aside to let me enter. The apartment was stunning, all white walls and modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was beautiful and cold, like a magazine spread. "Where's Blake?" I asked, setting down my bags. "He's at the venue doing final checks," Courtney said. "He'll be back late." I felt my heart sink. I'd flown across the country, and my son wasn't even here to greet me. "You can put your stuff here," Courtney said, gesturing to the living room. "The guest room is being used for wedding gifts and dresses, so you'll sleep on the couch." I stared at her. "The couch?" "Yeah, sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Everything's just really hectic right now." She walked toward the bedroom. "Help yourself to anything in the fridge," she called over her shoulder. Then she closed the door. I stood in the middle of that expensive, impersonal living room, surrounded by furniture that probably cost more than my car, and I had never felt poorer. Not financially poor, though that was true too, but poor in the ways that mattered. Poor in welcome, poor in warmth, poor in love. I set the veil box down gently on the coffee table, then sat on the couch that was to be my bed. It was a modern design piece, beautiful, but uncomfortable, too short for sleeping. I pulled out my phone, texted Blake. "I'm here, honey. Hope to see you soon." The message showed as delivered, then read. But no response came. I waited. 6 o'clock became 7, 7 became 8. I found some leftover salad in the fridge, ate it standing at the counter, too uncomfortable to sit at their dining table. Through the bedroom door, I could hear Courtney on the phone laughing at something someone said. Not once did she come out to check on me to ask if I needed anything to make conversation. At 11, the front door opened. Blake walked in, loosening his tie, looking exhausted. He stopped when he saw me sitting on the couch. "Hey, Mom," he said. "You got here okay?" I stood up, my whole body aching to hug him. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, moving toward him. He let me embrace him, but his arms barely closed around me, the hug perfunctory and brief. "Sorry I couldn't pick you up," he said. "It's been crazy." "I understand," I said, even though I didn't, even though it hurt. "Did you eat?" I asked. "Yeah. Grabbed something at the venue," he said, already moving toward the bedroom. "Listen, I'm exhausted. We can catch up tomorrow, okay?" He didn't wait for my answer. He walked into the bedroom where Courtney was waiting, closed the door, and I heard their muffled voices, her laugh. I stood in the living room, my arms still outstretched from the hug, and I felt something inside me begin to crack. I prepared my makeshift bed on the couch. I'd brought a small blanket from home, something soft and familiar. I lay down, but the couch was too short, my feet hanging off the edge. I could hear the city through the windows, sirens and car horns, and life happening all around me. But inside this apartment, I felt like a ghost. I was there, but I wasn't seen. I was present, but I didn't matter. Sleep didn't come until after 2 in the morning. And when it did, it was fitful, filled with dreams of being lost in crowds, calling Blake's name while he walked away without hearing me. I woke early the next morning, my back aching from the uncomfortable couch. The apartment was quiet. I tiptoed to the kitchen, not wanting to disturb Blake and Courtney. I wanted to do something useful, something maternal. So I started making breakfast. I found pancake mix in the pantry, eggs and milk in the fridge. I mixed the batter the way I'd done 1,000 times when Blake was growing up, made a full stack of golden pancakes. I brewed coffee, the rich smell filling the apartment. I set the table, found some strawberries to slice on top. It felt good to be doing this, felt like being a mother again. Blake and Courtney emerged from the bedroom at 9. Blake saw the breakfast spread, and his face softened. "Mom, you didn't have to do this," he said. "I wanted to," I replied, smiling. Courtney surveyed the table with a frown. "I don't eat carbs, Elsie," she said flatly. "I have a dress to fit into tomorrow." She picked up an apple from the fruit bowl and bit into it, still standing. Blake sat down awkwardly, poured syrup over a short stack. "These are great, Mum," he said quietly, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. I sat across from him, watching him eat, trying to find the little boy I'd raised in this distant stranger. "So what's the plan for today?" I asked brightly. "We have appointments all day," Blake said. "Vendor meetings, last-minute details. You can hang out here or explore the city if you want." "Can I come with you?" I asked. "I'd love to help." There was a brief silence. Courtney answered, "It's mostly boring stuff, Elsie. Contracts and payments. You'd be bored out of your mind. Plus," she added, looking at her phone, "we're on a very tight schedule." Blake nodded. "Yeah, Mum. Just relax today. We'll be back for dinner." They left 20 minutes later. Blake kissed my cheek quickly, distractedly. "See you tonight," he said. And then they were gone, and I was alone again in the cold apartment with a table full of pancakes nobody wanted. I cleaned up slowly, washing each dish by hand, drying them carefully. I wiped down the counters, organized the kitchen, trying to be helpful. Then I sat on the couch, unsure what to do with myself. I was in a strange city, alone, unwanted. I could have explored Boston, but I didn't have the heart for sightseeing. Instead, I spent the day in that apartment, reading a book I'd brought, watching the hours crawl by. In the afternoon, I decided to venture out for a walk. I needed air, needed to clear my head. I walked through the neighborhood past boutiques with price tags that made me gasp, cafes where a single coffee cost $8. I saw young families pushing strollers, couples holding hands, and I felt a loneliness so profound it was physical. I returned to the apartment as evening approached. Blake and Courtney came home at 7, both looking stressed. "How was your day?" I asked. "Fine," Blake said shortly. "Busy," Courtney added. They didn't ask about mine. Courtney ordered takeout on her phone, Thai food from an expensive restaurant. When it arrived, they took their containers into the bedroom to eat while watching something on their laptop. I ate my pad thai alone at the kitchen counter, the noodles tasteless in my mouth. I could hear them laughing at whatever they were watching, their voices carrying through the door. I cleaned up my container, washed it out, and sat back on the couch. This was my second night sleeping there. My back already ached. Tomorrow was the rehearsal dinner, the day after the wedding. Just 2 more days, I told myself. 2 more days, and I could go home. But first, I needed to talk to them about the veil. I'd been waiting for the right moment, and it seemed like there would never be a perfect time. The next morning, while they were having coffee, I gathered my courage. "Courtney, I said I brought something special for you." I went to the coffee table and retrieved the white box, opened it carefully. The veil lay inside, luminous even in the morning light. "This is our family heirloom," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's been worn by 4 generations of brides. My great-grandmother wore it in 1920, my grandmother in 55, my mother in 68, and I wore it when I married Blake's father. I would be honored if you wore it on your wedding day." I held the box out to Courtney. She looked down at the veil, her expression unreadable. Then she reached out and touched the lace, lightly, almost clinically. Blake had stood up, was looking at the veil with something in his eyes. I think I remember seeing pictures of Mom wearing this, he said softly. Courtney withdrew her hand. That's very sweet, Elsie, she said. But I've already ordered a custom veil from a designer in New York. It cost $12,000. It's been fitted to match my dress perfectly. I couldn't possibly wear this old thing. Old thing. The words landed like a slap. This isn't just old, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's history. It's family. It connects you to generations of women who loved and built families. Courtney smiled thinly. I'm sure it does. But honestly, it looks kind of dated. The style doesn't match my aesthetic at all. No offense. I looked at Blake, waiting for him to say something to defend the veil, to acknowledge what it meant, but he just looked down at his coffee. I think we need to respect Courtney's vision for her wedding, Mum, he said quietly. It's her day. Her day. Not their day. Not our family's day. Her day. I carefully closed the box, my hands shaking. Of course, I said. I understand. I carried the box back to my suitcase, placed it inside, and zipped it closed. Behind me, Courtney was already talking about something else, about the florist arriving early tomorrow. Blake was nodding, responding. Neither of them noticed me standing there, holding back tears. That afternoon they left again for more wedding preparations. See you at the rehearsal dinner tonight, Blake called as they headed out the door. The dinner was at 6 at some restaurant in the North End. I had the address. I'd get myself there, of course, just like I'd gotten myself everywhere else. I spent the afternoon getting ready. I showered, did my makeup carefully, put on the nicest dress I'd brought, a dark blue cocktail dress I'd worn to a friend's daughter's wedding last year. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. I looked like someone's mother, I thought. I looked exactly like what I was, but maybe that wasn't enough anymore. The restaurant was in a historic building with exposed brick walls and dim lighting. I arrived by Uber, another $40 gone from my dwindling funds. Inside, the space was already filling with guests. I recognized no one. Blake and Courtney stood near the back, surrounded by well-dressed people, laughing and talking. I made my way toward them, clutching my small purse. Blake saw me approaching. "Oh, hey, Mom," he said. "You look nice." "Thank you, sweetheart," I replied. "So do you." And he did. He wore a tailored suit, his hair styled, looking handsome and grown up, and nothing like the boy who used to help me bake cookies on Saturday mornings. Courtney barely glanced at me. She was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, diamonds glittering at her throat. "Where should I sit?" I asked. Blake looked around vaguely. "Oh, anywhere is fine," he said. Then Courtney's mother appeared, a tall woman dripping in jewelry, and pulled Blake into conversation. I stood there for a moment, invisible again, then found my way to a seat. The table assignments were displayed on a board near the entrance. I found my name at table 7, tucked in a back corner. Table 1, at the front of the room, was reserved for Blake and Courtney, their parents and the wedding party. I wasn't at table 1. Courtney's mother Patricia was, her father Harold was, but not me. I made my way to table 7. It was populated with people I didn't know, friends of Blake, from college I'd never met. They were kind enough, made polite conversation for a few minutes, then turned to talk among themselves. I sat quietly watching the room. The dinner was served course after course of expensive food. I barely tasted any of it. I was watching the head table, watching Blake laugh with Harold, watching Courtney lean into her mother for photos. Patricia stood at one point and made a toast. She talked about Courtney's childhood, about what a remarkable woman her daughter had become, about how blessed they were to welcome Blake into their family. Everyone applauded. Then Harold stood. He talked about family, about tradition, about the importance of building a strong foundation. He praised Blake's accomplishments, his bright future. He welcomed him warmly, genuinely. More applause. Blake stood, thanked them both, his voice thick with emotion. He talked about how lucky he was to have found Courtney to be joining such a wonderful family. He didn't mention me. Not once. Not a single word about the woman who had raised him, who had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities, who had flown across the country to be here. I sat at table 7, my hands folded in my lap, and felt myself disappearing. Course after course came and went. People toasted and laughed. The room was full of celebration and joy, and I was utterly, completely alone. When dessert was being served, I stood up and made my way to the head table. Blake was deep in conversation with Harold about golf. I touched his shoulder lightly. "Blake," I said quietly, "can I talk to you for a moment?" He turned and I saw a flash of annoyance cross his face. "Mum, I'm kind of in the middle of something," he said. "I just wanted to say—" I began, then stopped. What could I say? That I felt invisible, that I was hurt, that this wasn't the son I'd raised. I just wanted to say, "I feel a bit left out," I finally managed. "I haven't really spent any time with you, and tomorrow's the wedding." Blake's jaw tightened. "Mom," he said, his voice low but sharp, "this is my wedding weekend. It's not about you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there frozen as he turned back to Harold, dismissing me. Courtney appeared at Blake's side, slipped her arm through his. "We need to go take pictures with the photographer," she said, pulling him away. They walked off together without another glance at me. I stood by the empty chair at the head table, my son's words echoing in my head. "It's not about you." Of course it wasn't. But did that mean I didn't matter at all? Did that mean I should be grateful just to be here, just to occupy space, just to be tolerated? I left the restaurant before the dinner ended. I couldn't bear another moment of sitting in that corner, watching my son build a new family, while I faded into the background. I called an Uber, rode back to the apartment in silence. The driver tried to make conversation, but I couldn't speak. If I opened my mouth, I would cry, and I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not yet. Back at the apartment, I changed into my nightgown, lay down on that uncomfortable couch, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow was the wedding. Tomorrow I would sit in some back row and watch Blake marry Courtney, and I would be nothing more than a name on the guest list, a box to check off. I had flown across the country. I had paid my own way. I had brought gifts, brought history, brought love. And none of it mattered. I barely slept that night. When dawn broke, I was already awake, my back stiff, my heart heavy. I could hear Blake and Courtney moving around in the bedroom, getting ready to leave early for the venue. The wedding wasn't until 4, but they had preparations, hair and makeup photos. I waited for Blake to come out to say goodbye, to acknowledge me. But at 7:30, I heard the front door open and close. They'd left without a word. I sat up on the couch, pulling the blanket around me. On the coffee table, my phone buzzed. A text from Blake. "Ceremony starts at 4 p.m. Address attached. See you there." That was it. No good morning, no excitement, no warmth. Just an address and a time like I was any other guest. I got ready slowly, mechanically. I showered, dried my hair, applied makeup with hands that trembled slightly. I put on my dress, a soft lavender that I'd bought specifically for this day. I'd imagined Blake seeing me smiling, saying, "You look beautiful, Mum." But Blake wasn't here. Blake didn't care what I looked like. I looked at the veil box in my suitcase. I'd planned to leave it here, but something made me pack it in my purse. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was hope. Maybe I just needed something familiar to hold on to. I tucked the folded veil into my bag, ordered an Uber, and left the apartment for the last time. The venue was a resort on the coast about an hour north of Boston. The Uber driver quoted me $95 for the trip. I swallowed hard and agreed. The scenery was beautiful ocean and rocks and pine trees, but I couldn't appreciate any of it. I was thinking about what awaited me at the end of this drive. We arrived at 2:30. The venue was stunning, exactly as expensive as I'd imagined. Manicured lawns sloped down, to the water-white chairs were arranged in perfect rows, flowers bloomed everywhere. Staff in crisp uniforms directed guests. I paid the driver, tipped him what I could afford, and walked toward the ceremony site. Guests were mingling on the lawn, drinking champagne, laughing. I recognized no one. I looked for a familiar face, someone to talk to, but there was no one. I made my way to the seating area. The front rows had small signs reserved for family and wedding party. I looked for my name, looked for a seat marked Mother of the Groom. There was nothing. Every front row seat was assigned to someone else. Courtney's parents were in the center of the first row, places of honor. Her siblings, her grandparents, all carefully placed. The second row held the wedding party's families. The third row, more extended family and close friends. I walked down the aisle, searching, my heart pounding. Finally, in the fifth row, I found an empty seat. No name card, no reservation. Just an empty chair among strangers. I sat down, my purse clutched in my lap, the veil inside pressing against my side. Around me, guests continued to arrive, greeting each other warmly. I recognized some from the rehearsal dinner. None of them recognized me. Why would they? I was nobody, just an anonymous woman in a lavender dress, sitting alone. At 3:30, music began to play. Guests took their seats. I watched Patricia and Harold get escorted to their front row seats, Patricia in an elaborate hat and a gown that probably cost thousands. She held a handkerchief already dabbing at her eyes, radiating maternal pride. That should have been me, I thought. I should have been in that front row. I should have been the one crying tears of joy. The ceremony began. The officiant took his place. The groom's party walked down the aisle. Blake's college friends, looking handsome in matching suits. Then Blake appeared, walking down the aisle with his best man. He looked so handsome, so happy. My baby boy, all grown up. He scanned the crowd, waving at friends, smiling at familiar faces. His eyes passed right over me. He didn't see me, or maybe he did, and it didn't matter. The bridal party walked down the aisle, Courtney's friends in flowing dresses, and then the music changed, and everyone stood. Courtney appeared at the end of the aisle on her father's arm. She was beautiful, I had to admit. Her dress was magnificent, covered in crystals that caught the light, and on her head the $12,000 veil, long and dramatic, cascading down her back like a waterfall of silk. I looked at that veil, and I thought about the one in my purse. The one that had covered my great-grandmother's face in 1920, my grandmother's in 55, my mother's in 68, mine in 88. Generations of love, of commitment, of family. Rejected, too old, too dated, not good enough. Courtney walked past my row, and I caught the scent of her perfume, expensive and heady. She was smiling behind her veil, her eyes locked on Blake. I watched my son watch her approach, watched his face fill with love, and I felt my heart break completely. The ceremony proceeded. They read their vows, promised to love and cherish each other forever. Blake's voice was strong and clear. Courtney's was sweet and emotional. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Blake lifted the expensive veil, kissed his bride. Everyone applauded. Patricia sobbed loudly in the front row, Harold's arm around her shoulders, and I sat in the fifth row, my hands folded, my face carefully neutral, dying inside. Blake and Courtney walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. Again, Blake's eyes swept the crowd, finding friends to smile at, to acknowledge. He didn't look at me. They passed my row and were gone, and the ceremony was over. Guests began to stand to move toward the cocktail hour on the lawn. I remained seated. I couldn't move. I sat there as the rows emptied, as the white chairs were left abandoned, as the sun began its slow descent toward the ocean. An older woman in the row ahead turned back and saw me still sitting. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked gently. I opened my mouth to say yes, to lie, but no words came out. She looked at me with such kindness. "Do you need anything?" she asked. I shook my head. She patted my hand, then walked away, and I was alone in a field of empty chairs. I sat there for a long time, holding my purse, feeling the veil inside. I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The years of raising Blake alone after Paul died. The sacrifices, working double shifts to pay for his college expenses. The pride I'd felt at his graduation. The loneliness when he moved away. The hope I'd carried getting on that plane, believing that I still mattered to my son. And I realized sitting there in that empty ceremony space, with the ocean waves crashing in the distance, that I had already lost Blake. Not today, not this week. I'd lost him years ago, slowly, gradually. So slowly, I hadn't wanted to see it. He'd built a new life, found new people, created a new version of himself that had no room for the woman who'd raised him. I had become an inconvenience, an obligation, someone to be managed and minimized. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff. The cocktail hour was in full swing, on the lawn, laughter and music floating on the breeze. I was supposed to go there, supposed to smile and make small talk, supposed to sit through a dinner where I'd be tucked away at some forgotten table, supposed to watch my son dance with his bride, cut the cake, celebrate his new family. And then what? Sleep on his couch. One more night. Fly home tomorrow and pretend my heart wasn't shattered. No, I couldn't do it. I couldn't sit through one more hour of being invisible, of being tolerated, of being nothing. I deserved better than this. I had raised a good man, or at least I'd tried to. I had given everything I had. And if that wasn't enough for Blake, if I wasn't enough, then I needed to love myself enough to walk away. I pulled out my phone and searched for hotels. Found one 10 miles away, a small inn with a room available. I booked it. Then I called an Uber. The driver arrived 15 minutes later. As I walked away from the ceremony site, I could hear the party continuing behind me, could hear music and laughter and celebration. No one would miss me. No one would even notice I was gone. The inn was perfect. A small bed and breakfast run by a kind woman in her 60s named Helen. She checked me in, showed me to a room with a real bed, crisp white sheets, a window overlooking a garden. "It's lovely," I said, and I meant it. Helen smiled. "You look like you could use some tea," she said. I nodded, and she brought me a pot of chamomile, a plate of cookies. She didn't ask questions, just patted my hand and left me alone. I sat on the bed sipping tea and felt the weight of the day pressing down on me. I'd left my son's wedding. I'd walked away from the reception, from the dinner, from everything. Part of me felt guilty, but a larger part of me felt something I hadn't felt in days: relief. I opened my purse and took out the veil. I spread it across the white bedspread, smoothed the delicate lace. 4 generations of brides had worn this. 4 women who had been loved, honored, cherished on their wedding days. I thought about my own wedding, Paul slipping this veil over my face, his eyes shining with tears. I thought about my mother wearing it, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, women who had built families, who had been valued, who had mattered. I would not give this veil to a woman who called it an old thing. I would not give it to a son who made me sleep on his couch and forgot I existed. This veil was too precious for that. I folded it carefully, placed it back in its box. One day maybe it would find the right person, or maybe it would stay with me, a reminder of the women I came from, the strength I carried. I pulled out hotel stationery and a pen. I needed to write to Blake. I needed him to know why I'd left, needed to say the things I hadn't been able to say in person. My hand shook as I began to write. Blake. I wrote. I flew to Boston with so much love and hope in my heart. I brought the veil that connected 4 generations of strong women in our family, women who understood what it meant to be honored and cherished. I paid for my own ticket because you said you were on a tight budget, even though your wedding cost more than I make in a year. I slept on a couch in your home when I should have been given the guest room. I was not seated in the front row at your ceremony. I was not mentioned in the toasts. I was not included in your joy. I had to stop my eyes blurring with tears. I continued. I realize today that I am not part of your new life, Blake. Courtney and her family have replaced me. I have become an inconvenience, something to be managed and minimized, and I can't accept that. I won't. I am leaving Boston tonight, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. I deserve to be treated with dignity. I deserve to be valued, and if you cannot give me that, then I need to give it to myself. I will always love you. You are my son, and nothing will ever change that. But I cannot stay where I am not wanted. I cannot shrink myself to fit into the corners of your life. I hope one day you understand what you've given up. I hope one day if you have children of your own, you remember this moment, and you do better. I hope you remember that the people who love you most deserve more than scraps of your attention. I signed it simply, Mum. I folded the letter into an envelope, wrote Blake's name on the front. I'd have it couriered to the venue tomorrow morning. Let him read it while he was still on his wedding high, while Courtney's family was still surrounding him, while he was still convinced he'd made all the right choices. That night I slept better than I had in days. The bed was comfortable, the room was quiet, and I was finally at peace with my decision. When I woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the window. I felt lighter, somehow unburdened. I showered, dressed, and went downstairs. Helen had prepared breakfast, fresh fruit and yogurt, and homemade granola. "You look better," she observed. "I feel better," I said truthfully. She asked where I was from, where I was going. I told her the abbreviated version. She listened, nodded, understood. "You did the right thing," she said simply. "Sometimes love means walking away." I called a courier service, had them pick up the letter, and deliver it to the resort. Then I booked a flight home to Kansas, leaving that afternoon. I checked out of the inn, thanked Helen for her kindness. She hugged me tight. "You take care of yourself," she said. "You deserve to be happy." The flight home felt different from the flight to Boston. I wasn't weighed down by hope or expectation. I was carrying something else now. Clarity, understanding, strength. As the plane lifted off, I looked down at Boston growing smaller below me, and I felt no regret, only freedom. Blake started calling that morning when he received the letter. My phone rang over and over. I let it go to voicemail. He texted, "Mom, please, let me explain. I'm sorry. Where are you? We need to talk." I waited until I was on the plane until we were 30,000 feet above the ground before I responded. "I need space, Blake. Please respect that." He wrote back immediately. "Mom, please. I messed up. I know I did. Let me make it right." I looked at the message for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Maybe someday we can talk. But not now. I need time. And you need to think about the kind of man you want to be, the kind of husband, and someday the kind of father. I hope you choose to be better than you were this week." I put my phone on airplane mode and looked out the window. Below me, America spread out in patches of green and brown rivers, like silver threads, cities like scattered jewels. Somewhere down there, Blake was starting his honeymoon, beginning his married life. And I was going home to mine, to the quiet house in Topeka, to the garden and the book club and the church on Sunday, to a life that was small maybe, but mine. Coming home to Topeka felt like breathing again. The house was exactly as I'd left it, the garden's slightly overgrown mail piled up on the table. I unpacked slowly, put away the lavender dress I'd never wear again, stored the veil back in its box at the top of my closet. The first few days were hard. I cried a lot, mourned the relationship I'd thought I had with Blake, grieved the future I'd imagined. But I also felt something unexpected. Freedom. I didn't have to pretend anymore. Didn't have to convince myself that I was valued when I wasn't. Didn't have to make excuses for Blake's behavior or minimize my own hurt. I called my friend Margaret, told her everything. She came over with wine and tissues, let me talk for hours. "You did the right thing," she said fiercely. "You cannot let people treat you like that, even if they're your own children, especially if they're your own children." Over the next weeks, I told the story to other friends. Every single one of them supported my decision. Every single one of them said I deserved better. Blake kept trying to reach me. Phone calls, texts, emails. "Mum, I'm so sorry. I was stressed about the wedding. I let Courtney's family influence me too much. I should have stood up for you. Please talk to me." After 2 weeks, I finally responded. "Blake." I wrote, "I appreciate your apology. But words are easy. What matters is action. You made choices that week that showed me where I stand in your life. Until those choices change, until you can demonstrate that you value me, there's nothing to talk about. he wrote back. What can I do? How can I fix this? I thought about it for a long time before responding. I don't know if you can, I wrote honestly. But if you want to try, start by looking at how you treated me. Really looking at it. I paid my own way to your wedding. I slept on your couch. I wasn't seated with family. I wasn't mentioned in toasts. I was invisible. If you can understand why that was wrong, really understand it, then maybe we can start to rebuild. But I won't accept being treated that way ever again. I love you, but I love myself too, and that has to mean something. He didn't respond immediately. Days passed, then a week. I wondered if I'd been too harsh, if I should have been more forgiving. But then I thought about sitting in that 5th row, watching my son get married, without a single acknowledgement, and I knew I'd done the right thing. I started to heal. I planted new flowers in the garden, joined a pottery class at the community center, volunteered at the library. I built a life that wasn't centered around waiting for Blake to call, waiting to be needed, waiting to be valued. I built a life where I valued myself. 3 weeks after the wedding, I received a long email from Blake. He'd written it over several days, he said. He talked about how he'd let Courtney's family's expectations dictate his behavior, how he'd been so focused on impressing them that he'd forgotten about his own mother, how he'd always felt a little inferior to Courtney's wealth and status, and he'd overcompensated by trying to fit into their world. He wrote, I was ashamed of where I came from, Mum, ashamed of our small house and our simple life, and in trying to hide that I hid you. I made you invisible because I was afraid they'd see you and judge me, and that was unforgivable. The person who gave me everything, who sacrificed so I could have opportunities. I treated you like you weren't good enough. I hate myself for that. It was the most honest Blake had been with me in years. I cried reading it. But I also knew that understanding was only the first step. I wrote back, I appreciate your honesty, Blake. It takes courage to admit those things, but understanding what you did wrong is different from making it right. I need to see change, not just hear promises. And slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild. Blake started calling weekly, actually talking, asking about my life, listening. He sent me flowers for no reason. He called Courtney out when she made dismissive comments about Kansas or our family traditions. In September, he flew home to visit me, just him, for a long weekend. We talked for hours about Paul, about his childhood, about the distance that had grown between us. I'm sorry I forgot who I was, he said. I'm sorry I forgot who you are. I'm working on it, Mom. I'm trying to be better. I know, I said. And I appreciate that. But Blake, it's going to take time. You hurt me deeply. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I know. I'll wait as long as it takes. I don't know what the future holds for Blake and me. Maybe we'll find our way back to each other fully. Maybe there will always be a distance now. But I do know this. I am no longer living in the shadow of his choices. I am no longer shrinking myself to fit into his life. I stood up for myself. I walked away from a situation that diminished me. And in doing that, I found something I'd been missing for years. My self-respect, my strength, my voice, the same qualities that had been passed down through generations of women in my family, the women who had worn that veil with pride. I come from strong women, and I am a strong woman. Blake forgot that for a while, but I will never forget it again. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible to the people who should see you most clearly, I want you to know something. You deserve better. You deserve to be valued, to be honored, to be treated with dignity. And if the people in your life cannot give you that, then you have every right to walk away. It doesn't make you bitter. It doesn't make you unforgiving. It makes you someone who loves themselves enough to demand respect. I flew across the country for a wedding where I wasn't wanted. But I flew home for myself, and that made all the difference. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your stories. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this with anyone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that you are worthy of love, of respect, of being seen. Take care of yourselves. You deserve it.